July 1944, a hill in Normandy called Hill 192. If you were a German paratrooper on that hill, you were not new to war. You had seen Russia. You had seen Italy. You knew the sound of artillery the way a farmer knows the sound of rain. You knew the rules of war. You trusted them. They had kept you alive. And then, one summer night, the rules stopped working. The Americans began firing. Not a normal attack, not a barrage before an assault, just shells falling everywhere, on empty roads, on bushes, on hedges they had already destroyed the night before, on patches of grass where no German soldier was standing. In a single day, American guns dropped over 13,000 shells on that one small hill. When American planes flew over afterward, the ground looked like a moth-eaten blanket, torn, holed, dead. To the Germans hiding in their foxholes, this was madness. Their training said every shell must have a target. Every round must matter. You count your ammunition the way a poor mother counts coins in her purse. But the Americans were not counting. They were not aiming. They were just firing. The German officers reached the only conclusion their training allowed. The Americans, they decided, were fools. Children with too many toys. Soldiers who had never been taught the value of a single shell. They were wrong. Painfully, fatally wrong. The Americans were not wasting ammunition. They were not missing their targets. They had done something the German mind could not accept. Something that would slowly, quietly, terribly destroy the German army from the inside out. And it started with one simple idea the Germans never saw coming. To understand the shock, you must understand the German soldier's world. By 1944, a German artillery crew on the Eastern Front often had only 50 shells per gun. 50. That is all. 50 shells to defend a sector. 50 shells between you and a Russian wave coming through the trees. When you have only 50 shells, you do not waste them. You whisper to your gun like it is a child you cannot afford to feed. Every round you fire is a round you will not have tomorrow. Every shot is a small goodbye. So German doctrine was built on hunger. Every shell must serve a purpose. Every target must be confirmed. Every gun crew must calculate, plot, measure, and only then fire. And here is the heartbreaking part. Most of Germany's guns in Normandy were still pulled by horses. In 1944, the country that built jet fighters and rockets was moving its cannons the same way Napoleon had moved his. Old French guns, captured Czech guns, Russian guns from the last war. A patchwork army of tired weapons, pulled by tired animals, fed by tired men. When you live this way, you become very good at one thing: precision. German gunners could place their first shells inside a 50-meter circle from 10 kilometers away. Their accuracy was beautiful. It was art. But art is slow. To fire on a new, surprise target took 10 or 15 minutes of careful math. In war, 10 minutes is the difference between life and death. So when a German major sat across from American interrogators after the Battle of the Bulge, he kept saying one thing. The Americans, he insisted, fired without targets. To him, that was weakness. To his doctrine, it was madness. He could not see what was really happening.
The Americans had a name for their madness. They called it Harassing and Interdiction Fire, H&I. The idea was simple. So simple, it took an entire industrial nation to believe in it. You do not need to kill the enemy with every shell. You only need to break him. Picture a quiet road junction, 12 miles behind the German front. You cannot see it. You have no spotter there. But you know German trucks must pass through it tonight. Food, bullets, letters from home.
Replacement boys, 18 years old, frightened in the dark. So at 2:23 in the morning, an American shell falls there. No target, just a shell. Then another at 3:07, another at 4:18, another at 5:12. What happens to the German supply truck? It does not move. Or it moves and is destroyed. Or it takes the long road and arrives too late. Or the driver, awake for 36 hours because every junction has been getting the same treatment, falls asleep at the wheel and dies in a ditch. The German cooks never reach the front. The young soldiers in the foxholes eat nothing for 2 days. They shake from cold and hunger. They cannot sleep because every few minutes another shell lands somewhere nearby. They begin to break. Not one of them was hit by an American shell, and yet every one of them was being defeated by it. This was the secret. The Americans were not shooting at German bodies. They were shooting at German sleep, at German dinner, at German nerves, at a young soldier's hope that tomorrow might be quieter than today. The shells were never silent. The night was never safe. And slowly, the German soldier's mind began to crack. How could the Americans afford to do this? The answer? Rolled down the roads of France in trucks. It was called the Red Ball Express. 6,000 American trucks running day and night from the port of Cherbourg to the front. Civilian traffic banned, drivers exhausted, headlights cutting through fog and rain and German air raids. At its peak, the Red Ball Express delivered 12,500 tons of supplies every single day. In just 83 days, it carried over 412,000 tons of fuel, food, and ammunition to American soldiers fighting their way into Germany. And here is something most people do not know. 3 out of every 4 drivers were Black American soldiers. Men who in their own country were not allowed to sit in the front of a bus. Men who in the army were told they were not fit for combat. These were the men who kept the war moving. Without them, the guns would have gone silent. Now, compare that to the Germans. Horses, old trucks, captured vehicles, roads watched by American spotter planes that could call down fire in 3 minutes flat. In 1 month, May 1942, American factories produced 567,000 shells of just one caliber. 1 month, one type of shell, nearly 600,000 of them. A photograph survives from New Year's Eve, 1944. 3 young American gunners stand beside a giant 155mm shell. They have painted a message on it in white letters. For Adolf, Unhappy New Year. They are For Adolf, Unhappy New Year. They are smiling like boys at Christmas. A German gunner with only 50 shells could never write a joke on one of them. You do not joke with the last bullet that stands between you and death. That photograph, those smiles, that was the war's true secret weapon. March 23rd, 1945. The Rhine River. The last great wall protecting Germany. No invading army had crossed it in 140 years. That night, around 4,000 Allied guns opened fire together. 65,000 shells fell on the German defenders in the opening bombardment alone. The flash of the guns lit up the riverbank for miles, like a second sunrise made of fire. When American soldiers climbed into their boats, they expected to die. They had been told this would be the worst crossing of the war. Mothers back home were already preparing to grieve. But when the boats reached the eastern bank, there was almost nothing left to fight. the German defenders had been crushed before a single American foot touched the water. The Rhine fell. Not because American boys were braver than German boys, not because their tanks were better, but because their country had built a river of steel that never stopped flowing.
Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, before his death, wrote about it in quiet desperation. The Allies have an outstandingly large supply of ammunition. Those were not the words of a beaten general. They were the words of a man who finally understood the equation. The Germans had built their war on precision. The Americans had built theirs on presence. And in the end, presence won. Because presence does not let you sleep. Presence does not let you eke. Presence does not let you hope. The men who fired those guns were not trying to waste shells. They were trying to bring their friends home alive. And the system they built, clumsy, expensive, beautiful in its own way, did exactly that. Remember them, the gunners, the truck drivers, the young men who turned a river of steel into the road home.